Hi everyone, I'm Ashley McManus, Senior Director of Global Marketing at SmartEye. Welcome to the Human-Centric AI Podcast, where each episode we will interview a thought leader doing cutting-edge work in the AI space. A little bit about us. Affectiva is on a mission to humanize technology. Acquired by SmartEye in 2021, Affectiva created and defined the category of emotion AI. Built on deep learning, computer vision, speech science, and massive amounts of real-world data, Affectiva's technology can detect nuanced human emotions, complex cognitive states, activities, interactions, and objects people use. For over 20 years, SmartEye has developed AI in the form of eye-tracking technology that understands, supports, and predicts a person's intentions and actions. By carefully studying eye, facial, and head movement, our tech can draw conclusions about a person's awareness and mental state. Our eye tracking is providing new insights for research within aerospace, aviation, neuroscience, and more. So today's episode features Leon Hawthorne. Leon is a media executive, journalist, and academic, a former CEO of 2 satellite TV channels, 3 cable stations, a TV production company, and a dozen web channels. He created web TV channels for Boots, Borders, and Waterstones, and advised the CEOs of Hearst magazines, The Independent, and London Evening Standard on digital content strategies. In his journalistic career, he was a world news anchor for both CNN International and CNBC Europe. For BBC News, he was a member of the parliamentary lobby, attending daily briefings at 10 Downing Street, reporting politics and producing current affairs documentaries for BBC One and BBC Radio 4. Leon is presently on academic sabbatical researching for a PhD at City University of London while lecturing in media and corporate communication. In our conversation, we discussed his PhD research, Talking Heads, the use of virtual human presenters in the delivery of personalized news content. The experiment itself uses AI to detect how participants really feel about the images they see, instead of relying wholly on answers participants give on a questionnaire. After being granted permission, the cloud-based software accesses a participant's webcam to analyze their microexpressions as they watch the videos. Microexpressions are small, rapid movements of the facial muscle movements that psychologists believe betray subconscious emotional reactions. The technology for the experiment was developed by Affectiva, a leading technology specializing in biometric analytics, and the research is interested particularly in seeing how opinions vary depending on the age and sex of participants, and also how much they use smartphones and other technologies. Anyone over 18 who has access to a computer with a webcam can take part in this 10-minute online experiment. Let's listen in to learn more. All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. With me, I have Leon Hawthorne. Thank you so much for making the time to speak with me.
I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So to start, tell us briefly about your background. How has your career path taken you to what you're working on today?
Well, Ashley, after spending the best part of my life as a television journalist, both in front of the camera and behind, I was an anchor at CNN and at CNBC, and then I set up a few television channels in the United Kingdom. After kind of doing that, I found myself receiving a kind invitation to lecture undergraduates in media and communication. And that really reignited my love of learning. So at the tender age of 50, I decided to go back to school and do a research degree, first a master's by research at the University of Birmingham. It was entitled Old News, Young Views, and it was looking at how broadcast media reaches younger people aged 18 to 34 on digital and social media platforms. And presently, I'm doing this PhD at City University of London, which is why I'm talking to you today.
Excellent. Yes. So let's talk about that a little bit. So we recently connected because of an experiment you're running with Affectiva Technologies. So first, tell us a little bit about what you were looking to do with this experiment and why.
Well, the PhD subject, the title is Talking Heads, and it explores the use of virtual human presenters for the delivery of personalized content. Now, a virtual human is a computer-generated animation that looks like a real person. And the technology was developed for use mostly in computer games and in animated movies. But I'm exploring their possible use outside those spheres for communicating news and information to consumers, specifically whether and what place they might have in the news media.
Excellent. So can you share with us some of the mechanics around how you went about setting this experiment up?
Yeah, so the experiment I'm doing, it features 4 different visualizations of a newsreader. Number 1 is me, human, I think. Number 2 is a 2-dimensional animation. The third one is a 3-dimensional, more of a sophisticated animation. And the fourth one is an even more realistic virtual human. Anyone over 18 anywhere in the world can participate in the experiment. What they will see is 4 40-second videos of this or these presenters reading news clips, and I'm basically asking them to give their feedback. And there are different ways that I use to elicit that feedback, and one of those methods involves the use of Affectiva's technology.
Awesome. Yes. So I was going to ask you how, when you were looking into setting all of this up, how did you come across Affectiva as the vendor to help you execute on this Talking Heads initiative?
Well, you know what? When you're doing a PhD, the first thing you do is you spend the first year or so reading all the literature in the area. And I came across the work of Professor Rosalind Picard from MIT on effective computing, which was very influential for me. And she, as your listeners will know, is one of the founders of your company, and her work has informed a lot of the technology. So that was very influential, and that kind of led me to discover your company. So I think in reading Professor Picard, I came across Affectiva, and I immediately thought I ought to use this technology in my experiment. What I am using it is that as the participants watch the animated videos, yes, of course, they can fill in a questionnaire and tick boxes to say what they think. But another way they can use it is that the webcam on their computers can track their eye movements and their facial expressions. And this is decoded to identify what emotion they are experiencing. So, I think that method will give me perhaps a truer picture of what they really are thinking, as opposed to perhaps what they would say when they think consciously about filling in a questionnaire.
Yeah, absolutely. So, since you touched on this a little bit in our prior conversations, I remember we talked a lot about ethics and opt-in and consent around people having, images captured.
Yeah, well, we did a test of the survey before launching it proper. And a few people did say that they were reluctant to tick the box that allowed their webcam to be taken over, to be used in this way. And so they were, I suppose they were quite fearful about the new technology, perhaps more about the ethics of those people using that technology. So what I found myself having to do was to restructure the way I actually launched the survey to give them the option to either use this kind of AI approach or use a conventional approach. And presently, I would say 2-to-1 people prefer to use the conventional approach rather than the AI approach, which is slightly disappointing. Yes, that is disappointing. They're not showing much faith in people like me and anyone involved in technology, really, but that's the reality. But, one thing I tried to do in setting up the experiment was to alleviate some of these potential fears. Anyone who does any kind of academic work at a university has to apply to an ethics committee. And that ethics committee essentially ensures that there are appropriate standards that protect the participants' rights when they are conducting these, when they are participating. So what I tried to do was to assure them that, number one, any video of their faces whilst they're watching these experiments would never be stored or used. In fact, I don't even see it. The way it works is that the Affectiva technologists extract all the data, the emotional intelligence data from the video, and then they delete the video. I only ever see the data, the raw data, mixed with other raw data. So that's basically numbers and graphs. So there should be no concerns about the use of their image in any kind of way. So those were some of the things we tried to do to mitigate some of the fears.
Very cool. Great. So, the fears are a very real thing, definitely around all of this cool technology. So I'm curious with your knowledge and your expertise, what do you think some of the biggest challenges are with regards to maybe these reactions to AI, perhaps when it comes to journalism, as that's your background?
Well, I suppose a lot of people have expressed this concern before we even talk about Affectiva, just the use of Facebook and Google News and these news aggregator services that use personalization to determine which stories that they give to people. And there is some apprehension both among the news providers and among, one might say, more sophisticated news consumers as to what news they're getting and why they're getting it. And the fear that perhaps these personalization technologies are leading to greater separation of people in terms of what stories they receive. If you are a conservative with a small c-minded person, then you tend to be given lots of conservative stories. And whereas if you are more liberal, left-wing minded politically, you tend to be served more of those left-wing stories. So I suppose one fear is that any additional AI technologies will exacerbate some of those differences that people currently are experiencing with their news provision online.
Interesting. Do you think it would, lead to more polarity if you get that extreme personalization, or do you not really foresee that as being an issue?
It's hard to tell at this stage. I suspect if people are using these virtual faces as a conduit to deliver their news, my view is that they would be more engaged by the news because they are seeing a face, a human face, which of course is I think the most sophisticated and engaging form of media. So they should basically accept the information they're given better than if it was just reading text from a screen. So I suppose a cynic might say if the message is somehow malevolent and they are susceptible to that information, then of course the delivery mechanism will exacerbate that. But that's taking a very, very cynical view of news and of people. I think that in fact this would make news reach more people and they would consume it more readily than currently kind of just snacking on news, which is what a lot of people, especially young people, do at the moment.
Yeah, understood. Cool. So I know it's still early, but are you able to talk us through any of the findings that you're seeing in your experiment? I know it just kicked off, I think, on Monday, so a couple days ago, or any kind of data trends that you're seeing?
Well, yeah, as you say, it's a bit early. I also don't want to prejudice anything that any of your listeners might do when they go to. I hope they go to the site and take the experiment.
Yes, we'll link it in the show notes, definitely.
Absolutely. But basically, I'm not telling people what image they're looking at. So they don't know, am I looking at a real human or am I looking at a virtual human? So there may be some early indications that people don't know whether they're looking at a real person. And there's a possibility that if they may think a real person is fake, and they may think a fake person is real, which is interesting. But I don't know. Other than that, it's a bit early to say what the outcomes are going to be. But what I am doing, I am asking people for some basic demographic information. I suspect there will be differences in responses between men and women, between younger people and older people, between people who consume a lot of news and people who consume less news, and also between people who are into technology and people who are less into technology. I suspect that is likely, but I don't know that for a fact yet.
Yeah, definitely. And I will encourage all of our listeners to take the experiment. I actually just did it. So it was super quick. It was only like 10 minutes. It was very fascinating. So I hope you get a lot of data as a result of this. So was there anything that surprised you during kind of setting up this experiment or putting it together?
No surprises.
No surprises yet. Okay.
No surprises, no.
That's fair. That's fair. So if you had one takeaway for the audience listening today, other than, take the experiment, what would you like to tell them?
I think it's likely that people, when they consume news, they're used to having, an authoritative, disproportionately male, middle-aged figure reading the news to them. So it's likely that when they see different types of presenters, whether it's male or female, black or white, different ethnic groups, different ways in which they speak English, there may be some differences there. I also think that the lessons from my research will be more about how to implement this technology. Right? I'm not a technologist, so I'm not inventing any form of AI. I'm exploring how best to utilize it. And I suspect that the type of face we show people will be very influential in how they respond to it. And I'm also looking at how best and how when to use these faces, and also how realistic they ought to be, because part of the race amongst computer graphics people is to make the face look more and more realistic.
Yeah.
And it may well be that it's not essential that they look wholly realistic, that it might even be that an animated caricature of a face is more effective than something that is closer, 99% human looking. So, but as I say, it is early days yet, so I'm not yet drawing any conclusion. I have some early feelings, but it's a bit early to say yet.
Yeah, definitely. So what's next? Are you working on any other, research projects coming up that you could tease out, or are you is your plan to apply this kind of research to anything else?
Yes, well, in fact, this PhD specifically is looking at news, and it's being done in the Department of Journalism, as well as the Department of Computer Science at City University in London. I suspect, however, the greatest use of these virtual humans will be outside the kind of news and journalistic areas. It will probably be for things like customer service, the idea of having a face on your mobile phone or your computer when you go to your bank or your online retailer or a government agency, instead of having to wait for 30 minutes on a telephone to speak to a call center agent. You can go to a computer or a smartphone and talk to a virtual agent 24/7. And that face will give you all the information and basically be able to communicate it to you in a much more pleasing way than reading a web page. So my next area will be to look at the application in some of these commercial areas outside the general area of news and journalism.
Very cool. That's awesome. So for our listeners, can you let us know where they can go to learn more, or do you have any other call to action for them?
Yes, I would love it if all of your listeners went to aitalkingheads.com. aitalkingheads.com. That's the website. And from there, they can take the experiment, which will take about 5 to 10 minutes.
Awesome. Great. Anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap today?
No, it's been a pleasure being with you, but I think we've gone through everything.
Yes, fabulous. Thank you so much for making the time to speak with me. This is great.
Excellent. Thank you.
Would you watch the news online or via a mobile app if it were presented by something that looks human but is in fact an artificially intelligent virtual human? I thought Leon's prediction around computer-simulated humans becoming ubiquitous, adding faces to smart services like Amazon Alexa, Apple Siri, and Google Assistant really aligned with Affectiva's mission to humanize technology. His thoughts on, instead of just listening to disembodied voices, future consumers will also see a face whose appearance could be customized just for them was fascinating. To quote him in his appeal to the public to participate in his experiment, quote, "The public probably is not yet ready for this, but the technology of creating photorealistic 3D models is moving fast. The reason I am researching the application in news is because news is an area where trust, authority, and credibility of the presenter are crucial. So if virtual humans are accepted here, they will be accepted for most other forms of communication." I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to our Human-Centric AI podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts for new episodes. We are also on social media, so please reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram to share any feedback you have on the show. Don't forget to rate us and comment with your feedback to help make this podcast more discoverable for others. Until next time, thanks for listening.